Dan, did we ever solve a European swallow could convey a tropical coconut to America via the husk? Since you are the English person on the show.
For fuck's sake.
Well, hello there, FC Dallas Curious fan. Welcome to another episode of Third Degree, the podcast. Hi, I'm Peter, and with me are my two Huntsman-loving friends. First, Dan Crooke. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Peter. Are we friends?
We play one on a podcast, yes. And, of course, our fearless leader, editor, founder of thirddegree.net, Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hello, Peter, calling in today from my house because I'm on lockdown.
We are all on lockdown. Welcome to Corona World, Dan.
Thanks. I just started working from home today. Probably had Corona, passed it on to 50 people already, had it again, but we got there in the end.
How many times have each of you at least had a moment of suspicion that you may have picked up the coronavirus?
Constantly.
Just once for me when the front came through and I got a bad headache and my eyes started itching. I thought, but then it was just, allergy stuff in the front.
I had that whole bronchitis thing a couple of weeks ago, so I've still got a bit of a cough and hacking stuff up, and I'll have a cough and I'm like, oh my god. So wait, you're an idiot. You're still.
You're alive. You're perfectly healthy. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since there is no soccer anywhere, trying to do a podcast specifically...
There isn't Turkey.
Well, okay, that doesn't count. There is no soccer in the United States. How about that? And specifically with the club this podcast is specifically about, we figured the best way to try to handle this was do some question and answer with Patreons of Buzz's account and from the Twitter account and general stuff. So we've got a whole list of questions that we'll go through. But I did want to start off with John of the Dead's question, how are you guys? Dan, how are you?
Wow, I wasn't prepared for that question at all.
Buzz, how are you?
I'm good, although I'm worried about my old man. We're supposed to be on lockdown and he's out going to restaurants with his buddies. Yeah. He's 75.
Is he the governor of Oklahoma by any chance?
No, he's been doing good for most of the week. I think he just got stir crazy today, and one of his buddies was feeling depressed, so he went out with him to a restaurant. But hopefully, he won't get the SARS and kill himself. Knock on wood.
The SARS?
You made that sound like unrelated events. Just get the SARS.
You mean the COVID-19 is what you mean?
Yeah, the COVID-19.
Whatever.
SARS was a couple cycles ago.
That's right.
That's swine flu.
If you can get one virus, you can get all the viruses.
Yeah, right.
Okay, since Major League Soccer is on hold, trying to do a podcast about a specific team within the league is complicated and problematic. So we decided what we do is a round of questions and answers from the listeners, from Buzz's Patreon account, from the Twitter account, etc. We have a whole list of them here, and most of them, or many of them, we're dealing specifically with the questions of the delay, the length of the delay, and impacts on various parts. And one of the more interesting questions came from John Garcia. Actually, he was one of several people that asked this same question, which is interesting. And Buzz, I'll let you answer this first. How do you see a chance Franco Jara stays with Pachuca until the end of their season, whenever that may be, out of good faith, even though his contract will probably be up before then?
Well, I specifically had a chance to ask Lucci this question on the conference call this morning, and Lucci obfuscated a little bit because he's not the contracts guy, but he did say, as far as Lucci knows and as far as the club knows, the guy's already signed up with his contract for the season, for the FC Dallas part of the season. And professional contracts being what they are, his other one expires at the end of May, and the FC Dallas one kicks in, right away. So this is not the kind of thing, legally speaking, where you can just, I'm going to chill out and relax and stay with Mexico for a while, and then I'll show up. He actually has already signed at least the pre-contract, and from what Lucci said, it sounds like maybe even more than that. So the answer is no, Jara will not be staying in Mexico past the end of May.
Even if Liga MX as a season continues to roll on past that?
Well, think about it the way Major League Soccer would work. I mean, unless he has some sort of clause, that could said specifically something about this. I mean, if your contract expires like MLS players do at midnight, December 31st, and then they want you to come play on January 5th, well, is your insurance going to cover you? Are you going to do it for no money? It doesn't really work that way. Well, contract's up. He's already signed the next one.
Dan, is there any conversation over in Europe about how contracts, players who are due to run out of contract at the end of the current season, available for a summer transfer window, are impacted if, in fact, let's say the Premier League ends up running through July?
I haven't heard a lot, but, through July, you've got a large transfer window open. We're obviously not at a point where they're talking about transfer window closing, although that's such a fluid situation. You don't really need a global pandemic to wonder about when that's going to end next. The big situation in Europe really comes down to players running out of contract, in which case, it's a pretty cut and dry system. There's been enough lawsuits about it that, once it's over, it's over. And players aren't going to play without a contract, since there is still a fee on those under 24s, but not with the overs, thanks to the Bosman rule.
Yeah, if you wanted to keep a player past the end of their contract, you would have to assign them to some sort of short-term extension. And in his case, he's already signed the next thing. So
yeah, I wonder if there's a chance that FIFA may end up having to make some sort of uniform exception that allows teams to keep players under contract to the end of this current season, because you can see a scenario where a team who essentially intended to have a roster of players through a season suddenly now are missing, 3, 4, 5 key players because their contracts expired. So I think there's going to be more to play out about this, especially from FIFA when some of these bigger named club teams start having that issue pop up. And there's one player in particular that I'm thinking of off the top of my head that I can't recall the name of, over playing in the Premier League, who's due to leave his club at the end of the season, whose contract expires. And I can't remember who it is. Well, anyway, you get my point. I just don't know if it's going to be as clean as cut as everybody can just leave and go do the next thing, whether the league's moving on or not.
Yeah, when you get into the level of FIFA discussions, it's hard to know. I mean, you're talking about, especially in this country, you're talking about legal job ramifications and lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. And there's no way someone's playing without some sort of contract or conversation, just for insurance reasons, if not their own pay reasons. It's just I don't see it being legally possible when the guy's already done his next deal.
Yeah.
We think as well, FIFA's going to be driven by whatever goes on in Europe. And Europe, it's only a couple of years ago that there was a huge lawsuit that claimed that a soccer contract goes against workers' rights, and basically forced a player to be able to buy his way out of his contract after 2 years for a pretty set fee. It hasn't been used a whole lot, so it was never really a massive headline, but it kind of had the potential to really change a lot in the game.
Justin Bittner asks a similar but equally interesting question. Will the delay derail a Reggie Cannon summer sale? Dan?
So it definitely could. The big thing's going to be, right now, we've got all the travel restrictions from Europe. To Europe isn't really a huge deal, but there's a lot of European countries that are kind of pissed off with the president right now for putting that in place. So, who knows really what especially if the curve is at its peak later here than there. I know we could talk till we're blue in the face about numbers that people are throwing around, but if it's July, like some people have said, well, Europe's not going to accept flights during the main body of the transfer window, when really Reggie would be shopped around to Europe. Maybe he potentially couldn't even get into Europe. So I think that, more than the status of any season, is really going to determine his future or his short-term future.
Yeah, that'll be the reason that something could go wrong. It will be the logistical part, the government part, the travel part. In and of itself, the delays in play, that won't affect anything. Reggie's got a body of work on tape. If anything, this layoff's going to make him healthier and fitter for when the summer window does roll around. In terms of the MLS side, it's not like he's waiting for that doesn't coincide with the end of a contract. It's in the middle of a contract, or the end of a year, so all those play side, league side logistics, no effect at all. It'll just be, as Dan said, for, immigration and travel and will they let even Americans come into the country or not.
All right, so just hear me out. If, in fact, the delay goes for a while and the number of games that Reggie was scheduled to have played between now and July, which was pretty numerous both at the club and international level, national team level, if that suddenly now is reduced by 50% for the club and 100% for the international, you don't think that impacts people's interest level or awareness level of him overseas?
I don't. I think that he'll, like I said, I think he's been seen enough that anyone that's already interested in him or that's going to be interested in him is already interested in him.
Okay.
Because there's nothing to compare him to in terms of like, oh, I like this other guy who's currently playing better. I mean, everyone's off. So there's no, I don't see it delaying
And
in terms of play.
Plus with the availability of, tools like Y Scout and, to provide analytical data, like historic analytical data, numerous masses of tape of his body of work for both the national team and FC Dallas. Any team isn't really going to need to know what he's done over the past 6 months. They've got, like Buzz said, he's got such a large body of work at this point.
And are there any other right backs globally who release videos of themselves performing a Michael Jackson impersonation dance routine for their middle school talent contest like Reggie Cannon has? I don't think there is.
No, that video was worth a $2 million valuation bump just by itself.
It was pretty, and not only was the video great, it was super brave on Reggie's part.
Oh yeah. No, it's not like I'm a dancer, but you know how hard that is? How much you have to practice to be that good? He's not Michael Jackson, but it was amazing.
No, he was fantastic, but to go out in front, it's middle school, for Christ's sake,
I know,
right?
I know.
That takes a big sack to go out in front of all the boys and girls in middle school and perform a Michael Jackson routine dressed as Michael Jackson, single silver glove included, I might add.
Reggie's a pretty confident guy.
Yeah.
Clearly.
No doubt about it. All right. Jet Johnson asks, how big of an impact do you think the lost revenue of this season will have on the health of Major League Soccer? Buzz?
Goodness. Well, it's important to remember in that context that most MLS teams don't make money already currently. So you're talking about a bunch of billionaires, and this is why they're really careful about who they let own a team these days. You got to have crazy pockets. Because honestly, there won't be, most of the teams aren't looking at a revenue, at a profit loss. Now, if you cancel the whole season, that obviously is a bump that hurts anybody. But anybody that's buying into MLS these days knows that they're buying in short term to negative revenue flows. So it's not going to be that much more prohibitive than it is already. The player costs are the same. The stadium costs actually even go down. Money you spent on advertising you've already spent. It's not like you're going to be spending now. You should have already done it. So I don't see it having much impact on the MLS level. These clubs and these owners are all crazy rich and can handle it.
Dan Holden Grant asks a similar question, but wonders about the effect on smaller teams around the United States. I assume he means like USL and other lower division leagues.
Yeah. Hey, Holden, how's it going? Haven't seen you since, coronavirus. What's up? When you look at MLS...
That's how small our podcast is. We actually give shout-outs to people who send in emails like they're our next-door neighbors.
He's my fellow beer guardian.
I know. I love it. Go ahead.
He's the guy that wears the red, white, and blue helmet on the capo box.
Oh, okay. Well, Hello, Holden.
traditionally soccer teams, they put out their budget based on their income, right? In this modern day of crazy billionaires and Seattle Sounders and, all these teams with just stupid amounts of money where they're like, hey, we don't care what we make, and if we make a loss, we're going to throw money out there. They don't care. When it comes to your Denton Diablos and of the world and, even down to your Forward Madisons, where it does kind of become do or die based on the next set of revenue. They are gonna be affected. They are gonna have to pull the purse strings in a little bit. It's just unfortunate reality. We probably are going to see a couple of UPSL and MPSL teams not return from this break, unfortunately. Hopefully enough teams are financially stable where they can just survive it out. And the reduced expenditure, as Buzz mentioned, that still applies. Teams lower down have to rent stadiums or have some day-to-day costs, which will at least be reduced. So there's, hopefully that will help people out.
Okay, but my question, and let me go back to I think the impact to the lower division teams is pretty clear because those run on razor-thin, if not negative margins, players having to get paid, all that stuff. But, at the Major League Soccer level, I think we're all working under this premise that they'll start playing games again in, I don't know, let's be super conservative and say 8 weeks. But if they start canceling games outright and they start losing that game day revenue, which we know from the beginning of this process was so important to the revenue and cash flow positivity of the league that they were willing to suspend games versus play them in empty stadiums, that's where I think, and not just limited to Major League Soccer, I think this goes for all sports teams in many cases. That's when this really starts to become a financial issue for everybody.
Well, MLS has a higher dependence on ticket sales for revenue than other leagues, which are more broadcast dependent. That's why things like the NBA were willing to play with empty stands as a league. Not the players didn't like it, but as a league because their money comes from broadcasting. It certainly is true that most of the revenue for MLS teams comes from tickets, and if they end up canceling games or canceling the whole season, then teams are going to be cutting back. Certainly, they're going to cut personnel, they're going to lay off people, but they're not going to cut players because those guys are paid anyway, no matter what, and they're going to need them long term. So it's just going to be staff that are going to have to ramp. They figure they can ramp back up all their staff when the next season rolls around. There is definitely going to be a loss of revenue, but anyone playing in this pool, the MLS pool, knew coming in they were going to be spending a lot of money. So it's not like a team's going to fold, if you get what I'm saying, in MLS. Whereas a bunch of lower level USL2, MPSL, NASL, NISA, all those myriad of tier 3, tier 4 leagues are going to have teams fold completely. They're going to have teams go into hibernation and lay off everybody and cut all their players because those rosters they can just build back out of whatever's laying around afterwards, relatively speaking. So it's a very, very different landscape. And our pyramid is not solid. Our pyramid is held up by the top.
You mentioned layoffs, and we know locally the Dallas Sidekicks have started laying people off.
Yeah.
Another thing as well with MLS, a lot of teams are dependent on their season ticket revenue. That's what drives the budget. You look at a team like FC Dallas, and the majority of ticket sales aren't season tickets. It's on a regular game, a third to a quarter. It's a lot easier to say the money's in the bank, and we'll credit you part of your next season ticket, or we'll give you, a bunch of extras for free, or something where they keep the money and they're not giving any back. But it's a lot harder when, you're not getting the Walk Up sales and the single game sales, which FC Dallas, especially, and those kind of lower tier MLS teams really do rely on.
So, hypothetical, if other USL C teams like Forward Madison, Lansing, Greenville which are the clubs that I think we're talking about that are in the most danger of really being impacted financially, get to the point where they start furloughing players, will the Hunts continue to pay North Texas SC players on that roster if they're not playing any games over a longer extended period of time?
I think a few of them they would, but there are a bunch of them that they probably would not. That's a good question. At this point, I don't have any answers to that. I'm just guessing, but there's a difference between a player that you think that you're trying to bridge from your academy to your first team and has first team potential, and then you have some players who are let's call them semi-pro filler guys that play for both North Texas and for the Sidekicks, for example, or Outlaws.
Right.
And then you have guys that are in on a 1-year loan. You just wipe the loan and let them go back. It just depends on every guy's going to be different. Like they're not going to let Breck Evans walk, for example. A guy they've invested in the academy for 5 years, and they've now invested a year, and now they're investing a second year at the Texas level. That guy, they'll try and figure out how to help. But then your Oscar Romero, who's $1,000, I'm assuming $1,000 a month, semi-pro, who also plays for the Outlaws. I mean, that guy will be, working at wherever he can get a job.
Well, lots to be determined about the delay, and I certainly have this weird feeling this is going to go longer than anybody thinks it's going to. I don't think this is going to be over in a month or 2 months' time. I'm really worried that this is going to be something that globally ends up impacting business and sport for way longer than just a couple of 3 months, unfortunately. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but that's certainly my concern at this point. And we'll only be able to answer these questions as we continue to go through it.
Well, I'm obviously very concerned about it because every piece of revenue in my entire life is wrapped up with sports. So surely I'm definitely worried about it.
All right.
Huge gambler. Huge gambler.
Huge gambler.
Huge gambler.
I'm in a way. Yeah, I'm gambling on third degree at this point. So.
Yeah. Well, the Patreons love you, Buzz. All right, let's
you.
move over to an interesting set of questions from Carlos Ramon Martinez, who has, I don't know if he's taking umbrage with our opinions about Jesus or if he just wants more explanation. So the question's pretty long, but I'm going to edit it down into this. Can you talk more about Jesus and his play in these first 2 games? I feel like he is the team's most interesting player at this point. He goes into further part of the question about how he understands how he's not the most effective, or maybe he's not playing at 100%. But, Buzz, do you want to try to parse this out a little better?
Sure. Well, Carlos specifically mentioned working hard and making runs, and some of the runs, that's true. But there's definitely, and he is working hard, I'll give him that. But there's definitely some runs that are missing from last year when he would turn and penetrate into the box in the final third, and those things aren't happening. And on top of that, even though he is working hard, the passing rate has dropped, and the creativeness has dropped, which comes down to the linking and the checking back, and the thing that Lucci specifically cited, which was his line breaking when he checks into midfield and makes chaos happen. So, real quickly, 2 home games this year versus all home games last year. This year at 65% passing, last year at 82%. Now, some of those games were even as a forward, which is worse passing usually. So that's a 15, 17% drop off in passing percentage. Obviously, he's got 0 goals and 0 assists, but here's the other 2 things for me. This year, 0 successful dribbles at all this entire season, 1 key pass a game. Last year at home, 1.4 key passes a game and a hold and 1 dribble a game. So now that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's basically a significant chunk better or worse, this year than last year. And this is my favorite one. Last year at home, 1.3 bad controls a game, and this year 2.5. So again, these are small samples, but when you're talking about the quality of Jesus's play compared to last year, it is definitely dropping off. Now, of course, we think very highly of him, and we think in the long run he's going to be a great player, but there's definitely some signs, just statistically alone, that he's fallen off. And in particular, when we watch the game, we just don't see those impactful passes, those final third breaking passes, those final third darting runs, and those connecting, linking stuff that he was doing last year. So that's what we talk about. Despite the fact he is working hard and making runs, it's just not coming together.
Dan, do you think Lucci probably puts? How's the best way to ask this question? Do you think Lucci holds on to Jesus longer as a starter than he probably should?
I think he will.
Well, has he? I mean, not even worry about going into the future. Do you think he already has? I mean, even thinking back to last season.
I mean, I'd rather just keep it in the present and say no, because your alternate is going to be starting Paxton there, and Paxton just wasn't fit enough to start. Now, if New York City was on schedule and Jesus hadn't gone with the Olympic team, I'd be kind of like, maybe Jesus can sit this time and come on those last 20 minutes and run up players and kind of do the things that he does really well. The things that we just haven't seen. He kind of needs not even a kick up the arse. He's definitely trying. It's not a case of effort, but he just needs to refine that, find the things that were successful last year, and sort of tweak those. Not just right now he's in such an important position as the link-in player between the midfield and attack that he can't have a quiet game. It's just one. It's not a six who's made a couple of stops but hasn't done a whole lot offensively. It's the one player who, if you are quiet, it really sticks out.
It's accentuated right now by the fact that Tanner Tessman's playing as a second six. So Jesus is even more on an island than usual. There's not a double 8 situation in the first two games. It was those 10 with 2 6s, if you will. So that highlighted the reliance of the team on Jesus and magnified his poor play in terms of.
Do you think that the reason for the double 6 is related to Lucci's hesitancy to put too much pressure on Tanner to go forward, or more of a concern of giving Thiago Santos some additional help as he was kind of figuring out the league for the first time?
I think it's both of those things, and I think it's Jesus's not necessarily willingness to play that, what you remember last year, what Matt Doyle termed triple pivot, when Paxton was swinging back from time to time and taking that spot. Jesus doesn't do that. So when you have Jesus in there, you need some people behind him that are a little more holding in nature, which is fine if it's Brandon Cervania or Brian Acosta as a linking 8. They do that. They trick back and they do that turn. So it's a combination of all three of those things, and it being early in the season, and it's a multifaceted issue. But it definitely, what Lucci specifically said, it was for sure the double 6 with a single. So,
and just going with that theme of Jesus' defensive actions, you can kind of contrast it. When they brought Paxton on in the first game, they immediately switched to a single 6 and more of like a double 10, because Tanner was dropping back, Paxton was dropping back. I think it was Matt Doyle highlighted a couple of like ridiculous defensive runs that Paxton made prior to the goal. That Santos isn't getting left out on an island himself. He's going to have some cover from one of the two.
Right. Okay, Ryan T. has asked a question completely unrelated to on-the-field stuff, or at least not directly, which is, it's been known for a long time that the Huntsman business model, and kudos to Ryan for using Huntsman, is not to spend big money on transfer stars, but to spend on homegrowns and the youth academy. But I've never heard why that is exactly, besides the term sustainable business model. Do the Hunts not have the money to spend big? Do they see FCD as a money-making venture where they can't make money that way? Basically, I know they won't spend the money for Funes Mori, but why? Dan?
So let's just dispel a quick myth. There is no way in hell that FC Dallas is a money-making venture. The youth section certainly can be, but the first team, no. Sustainability is obviously good. You want, every owner should aim to make their club at any level self-sufficient. You don't want to be bankrolling it, because all it takes is a rainy day and suddenly the club's out of business, or you're desperately trying to find a seller who is not going to give you a good price because they know you're in a hole. So being self-sufficient and having a high level of talent in doing so is obviously great, whether that's for the sake of success or the sake of sales. And the other thing, the Hunts definitely feel they have a duty to the national team and to the game as a whole. And the reality is, you make stars and it grows the game. If going out and spending a lot of money on some big name players was the way to make soccer even a mainstream sport in the United States, NASL would have achieved it, but it didn't. Instead, you had a vacuum for 20 years. It's just, a lot of it is going to be, people talk about FC Dallas is producing so much of the national team, and that's what the Hunts want. They want to have players going off to national team, and eventually, if FC Dallas ever respects MLS respects the international windows properly, that they know they're not going to miss out on that basis. It's just, it's just coming down to responsibility. Most countries have large academies. You can look at the England team and see a lot of West Ham and Liverpool and Man United. And when you look at where players are coming from, Spain, it's all Barca and Real. That doesn't really exist with the US national team, but it will, and it will probably be FC Dallas, New York Red Bulls, LA Galaxy, Real Salt Lake.
Yeah, I think everything that you talk about, Dan, is accurate, but I also think it's a byproduct of the real core reason for the way the things are. And frankly, that just comes down to the fact that the Hunt family, starting with Lamar Hunt, treat this as a business and a business first. And to operate good businesses, you have to hit a bottom line. You want to keep things in the black, and you want to keep things that are in the red to a minimum. And I think there is some logic to the argument that the reason why Lamar Hunt pared all of his ownerships down in Major League Soccer from Kansas City and Columbus down to Dallas was because he and his family had the foresight to understand that the real true opportunity to make revenue in this league is in fact through youth soccer, which is a cajillion-dollar business. And if you go and look and really begin to think about where the Hunt family has invested their money and gotten the biggest return, it is with that youth club. There is no argument to be made that not only can the youth academy, the youth clubs, the premiers, the select, and the academy make money, it does make money. I mean, the math adds out to it's got to be well plus of $10 million a year.
15, yeah.
Yeah, that they are generating from that. And I think I'm still correct in saying that the Hunt business model breaks this up into three pieces. It's the youth club system is one business. The second business is Toyota Stadium. And the third business is the Major League Soccer team. And those number 2 and 3 don't make any money. In fact, they probably are money losers. It's the youth part of this that is making money. So, we've talked about this before. In my mind, FC Dallas is kind of this weird upside-down thing from everything else in the league, which is it's not a Major League Soccer team that just happens to have a very successful youth academy. What the Hunts have done is they successfully built one of the nation's best and most successful youth club and academies that just happens to have a Major League Soccer team atop it, and they use the club team or the Major League Soccer team as a carrot for kids to want to get up, because that's where the kids all want to go. It's a path to a professional career. But I don't think the Hunts ever truly believe FC Dallas as a senior team can be a significant revenue generator or a profitable machine. It's why they don't spend a ton of money on marketing, because the amount of money they'd have to spend in marketing to make up the 6,000 extra people per game to fill up that stadium, that math doesn't work, right? It would take them millions of dollars to promote and brand this team successfully quick enough to suddenly now go from 14 or 15,000 to 20,000 per game. and the added revenue from that extra $5,000 per game is just never going to make up the difference in what it costs to do the marketing. So I always tell people this is all about the bottom line, and it's not a criticism of the Hunts. Look, they are a family that have successfully owned professional teams in this country for well over a combination of 100 years, and they continue to do very, very well for themselves. There are a lot of other professional teams that have come and gone, or ownerships that have come and gone in that time. But when you really want to understand the way this business is run, is just remember that it is a business, and they treat it as such first and foremost.
I would follow that with a reminder of as you just mentioned, the history of the Hunt family in sports, Lamar and his kids. The NFL, they got in, at the right time and were smart and didn't go crazy, and that league built and grew, and now it's worth $2 billion. And compare that to Hunt's experience in the North American Soccer League when he watched the Cosmos go batshit crazy and destroy that league and blow the whole thing out of the water and kill it all. So their mentality on soccer is to do what they did in the NFL, which is be smart and be budget conscious and make the thing survive. And Lamar saved this league already once. He doesn't want to see it crash again, and just wait until the entire league comes up and the entire league becomes profitable, probably hitched around TV revenue someday, and that's when their franchise will be worth a lot of money, and then you might see their behavior possibly change. So the history matters with this family.
Yeah, it really does. And I sometimes you can take the fact that the Chiefs have won a Super Bowl for the first time in 50 years as a criticism, but that's also been an incredibly successful team in terms of revenue because that stadium's been a sellout forever and ever. They don't have to put a lot of effort towards marketing that team in Kansas City. That's really the number one thing that goes on in that town, and that's what really drives all of that revenue. So what happens with them in Frisco is a very, very different experience. But Buzz, I think you're exactly right. This is very much a long-term play for the Hunt family. Look, they paid essentially nothing for the team to begin with. They essentially just took over the debt of the existing Dallas Burn. And again, for those of you that are listening that are relatively new to this, most people have forgotten the Dallas Burn didn't have an owner. Right? It was a redheaded stepchild of Major League Soccer that was an extra line item on the overall budget that had to be run as a grassroots thing by about 17 people here in Dallas. They didn't have an owner back in the day. And so the Hunts took it over essentially only for the cost of the debt and the operating expense. And now the club is worth what? A couple $100 million?
Yeah, something like that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they were willing to sell and divest the teams that were smaller market teams when they realized Dallas is the biggest market, and it has both the Anglo and Hispanic side, and it has a lot to say, go for it when the whole thing eventually becomes what we all think it could become.
All right. Well, we put a nail in that one.
Yeah.
Norm Hull has asked a question that is this Buzz. This will be for you. We did hear today that FC Dallas is going to begin airing some older games or previous season games on their network of TV stations. They announced 4 of them. Buzz, I still don't know why you call them old school because they were games from 2018 and 2019, but. Norm's asked this question: why don't FC Dallas MLS release classic games for its fans to be watching right now?
Well, the question would more than likely be what their network, because if you read that article, they're actually going to air them on their local channel first. So part of it will be what that local channel wants to be willing to air, and that might come into is it an old SD broadcast or is it a new HD broadcast? That could be a factor. I did call it old school because I was hoping that the idea is that eventually they will show some of these old games and not just games from like a year ago. We'll see how that goes. Now, in most leagues, and I'm sure this is the case, within a certain window of the game, and it varies on the contract, the league owns their own images. They own the broadcast of their own game. NFL Films is a really weird example, and that's a really long, crazy story, but everybody else, like I think it's most of the time within 48 hours, the league owns the pictures. So they could, in fact, go back and show any game they want to pretty much as long as they have a copy of it. That's one thing I worry about is I don't know with the turnover that's happening with FC Dallas and the Burn and how small that operation was in the beginning, if anybody ever actually bothered to save broadcast-worthy copies of all their old games. It's entirely possible that they don't exist in a lot of cases, which will be a real tragedy, other than Kevin Lidstrom's VHS copies that he used to make back in the day.
Buzz, don't you and Dan have an article coming up talking about you if they would just air any games, you'll have like a top 10 list of FC Dallas / Burn games you want to see again?
Oh yeah, that seemed like an obvious thing to do. Is like once they started airing one or two old games, Dan and I started putting our heads together today, and we're going to have it tomorrow. We're recording this Wednesday night. We're going to have a list tomorrow of some of the great games in FC Dallas history that we think they should air. So hopefully people will enjoy that list.
I would kill to see the opening day game at the Cotton Bowl with the Hugo Sanchez bicycle kick. I would.
Yeah, obviously the first ever home game or first ever game in their history, whichever one we think looks better, will be one of the 10 choices. That goes without saying.
Okay. Dan, Lance Little has asked, do you think you'll ever get tired of rooting for the underdog of FCD?
No. I think isn't supporting a team a labor of love. If you support it, support it through thick and thin. So, you it's like any passion. You have days where you're pissed off of it, days where it's the greatest thing on earth. I don't know. I always find it a little bit strange when people like question the ability to, when people talk about, the Hunts don't spend money, I'm going to go support Atlanta, or I'm going to go support Portland. It's like, well, did you ever actually support FC Dallas or your Premier League team or whoever? Or did you just, were you just kind of like there? We obviously don't have promotion and relegation from MLS, but, if you support a team, you should support a team at any level, whether they got relegated down to the foot of the pyramid or whether they win MLS Cup. So, no. I
don't think it's a totally unfair question, Dan, and maybe it's not a function of getting tired of rooting for an underdog, but I could understand why fans may feel a lack of enthusiasm when they see other teams coming into the league and producing giant crowds and signing name players, and the level of enthusiasm and excitement that surrounds some of these teams. I do understand that aspect of it. If you and maybe. Changing a desire to go to as many games, or maybe not buy season tickets and just go to a few games in a particular season. So I understand your attitude towards the question, but I also think I don't think it's an unfair question.
My answer to that question is based on probably partially my age. And Peter, you and I are roughly the same age, so I don't want to speak for you, of course, but you will know my experience, which is we spent a good part of our lives with no league at all to follow. I caught the very end of the North American Soccer League when I was, 10, 12, something.
Yeah.
And then had nothing until, other than the sidekicks, which I enjoyed the sidekicks as a teenager, but to me, indoor soccer is not the same game. I don't enjoy it like I do outdoor soccer. So to me, the answer is, having had a big chunk of my life up till I was basically 26 with no real pro teams to support or cheer for, I'm just super excited and always will be super excited and will always be there watching, supporting, just because there is a team at all that is a Division I professional soccer league playing at the highest level in this country. They could literally be the worst team in the league every single year. I would still go because I love high level professional soccer in my local market for me to go to and cheer for. So do I want them to win? Absolutely. I want them to be great, but my fandom would not change based on whether they're good or bad. It doesn't matter to me. Just being there at all is all that matters.
Yeah, you and I are aligned on this, and I also feel like being angry about how teams or clubs are run and ownership spending is just part of the experience of being a fan of a soccer club, either here in the United States or elsewhere, whether it be Mike Ashley or the Glazers or whoever it is, right? You just when Tom Hicks owned Liverpool, everybody hated that guy, and so I think that's part of the experience. But you have to wed yourself and set an allegiance. And speaking of that, I'll do a slight promotion of the radio show, The Kick Around, on the Ticket this Saturday, because Andy and I have joked forever about something we call the Court of Allegiance, which is if if you signed up to be a fan of a Premier League team and you decided you didn't want to be a fan of them anymore because they got relegated and now you have a hard time watching them, we would allow listeners to call in and submit an application for a change of club allegiance, which is a one-time per lifetime opportunity. Interestingly, for the first time ever, we got an application this week for somebody who is asking for a change in allegiance from FC Dallas to Austin FC.
Wow.
And so, and he has written a lengthy explanation as to why he is asking for this change in allegiance, and we will review it on the show on Saturday and make our judgment and do it live on the air.
Well, that'll be fun.
Is the death sentence an option?
It is, very much, yes.
Use it.
If in fact, I will add, because I don't think he knows this yet, if in fact his application for change of allegiance is accepted, he has to agree to immediately give away any possession he owns that is branded with the club of which he is disavowing.
Oh, wow.
Any and all, anything. Tchotchkes, items, shirts, hats, whatever. He has to give them all away.
Harsh penalty.
Yeah. Well, no, fair, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Fair but harsh.
fair but harsh. Let's see. Where were we? We were on number 4. No, we were on number 5. So now we're up to number 6. Virgil Ross Green, Buzz, has asked you to predict next homegrown signings.
Okay, next homegrown signings. It will not be a player directly out of the academy. There's a gap that's formed. It would have been Jonathan Gomez next year, but he's obviously left. So after that, academy-wise, you have to wait till the current U15s are up a little bit older, probably a year and a half, 2 years from now, maybe. So in the short run, you will see one player probably sign for North Texas relatively soon, maybe this year, Justin Shea, but he won't be a homegrown right away. So the answer to the question, next homegrown, is a college player next year. You'll see just like goodness gracious, I just brain farted. Just like Eddie Munjoma was this year, You'll see it'll probably be one of 3 players. Brandon Turwig, who's the center back at SMU, who's been a 4-year or about to be a 4-year starter in college. Mark Salas, who's a highly underrated defender who can play every position in the back line for UNC. Or Gio Montes de Ocha, which I probably butchered his name, who also plays at UNC but blew out his knees for his senior year. Very creative, interesting attacking player. If he recovers and has a great year, one of those 3 guys, perhaps as a college player, depending on how their season goes. That's your next homegrown.
And then, Buzz, as a follow-up, Fritz asked the question, what are the odds that one of Montgomery, Burgess, or Evans turns into at least a above-average MLS center back? All 3 of them? 2 of them?
One of them very, very good. I actually firmly believe now that Callum Montgomery could be really close to Matt Hedges 2.0, like a career MLS center back and play for Canada. Callum Montgomery. Nkosi Burgess is the highest ceiling and the lowest floor both. He could actually be better than MLS, or he could never play in MLS. It'll just depend entirely on his own work rate and willingness to learn, because he's an amazing athlete, but he has a long way to go. And then Brock Evans has the toughest road to make it. Right now, he looks like a USL Championship player. Now, if this year he does really well in Austin and makes some strides, he'll have a shot at MLS. But right now, he's probably an outside the MLS player. So really good that's 1, and then maybe 2, but probably not all 3.
All right, Dan, I was hoping you could help out with this question from Trent, which is largely a question about scouting. And the question is there a scenario where FC Dallas needs to sell low on a player so that their players will show well on the international market before a pipeline that clubs will then consider them to be filled with talent worth looking at? I'm paraphrasing Trent's question.
No. That's not really how scouting works. FC Dallas are heavily scouted by teams across the world as a team with a great reputation for its academy, a team that shows well in large tournaments, including the Dallas Cup. Obviously not this year, but in other seasons. With a lot of teams, their scouting network just extends everywhere. There are people that don't receive don't receive like a stipend or a salary or anything like that. But what they are looking for is a finder's fee. So they are scouting local games. They are, they're running things up the chain. Like, you need to take a look at this guy, check out any video on him. And they're in the hunt for that finder's fee, because you're talking, if you get an FC Dallas youth player to a European club, you might get, somewhere between 5 and 20 grand as a finder's fee. These are, so that they're motivated to work a lot, and they're watching at, every remember
Right.
from academy to MPSL up to MLS and beyond. I remember one of my PE teachers when I was at school was a scout for Aston Villa, and I'd always bump into him at games, like just little local games, and it was exactly that. He was looking for guys that could, to run up the chain to maybe get into their youth system. So, there isn't a pipeline or anyone that needs to be sold low. Players are going to sell for their value, or with MLS maybe a little bit below, but things like that will help MLS find its value.
Yeah, though, as Dan said, I know of a guy right now in town here who's a scout for German teams, and he doesn't work for a team. He works independently, and he sells players and does a finder's fee with clubs all up and down Germany, just from like the Dallas area. And there was a guy that used to work out of FC Dallas that FC Dallas hired as a scout named Jorge Avilal, something like that. This is like 10 years ago now, maybe even 15. He helped them when they went to Chile. He helped them scout players, and he scouted their dudes. He's the one that took the Funes Mori brothers to Chelsea and then facilitated their move to River Plate. So these kind of headhunting agents work all up and down the system, in this country, and sell and mitigate and help move to other teams around the world.
Hey, Buzz, William Hagens is asking a question about the goalkeeping situation, considering the age of Jimmy and Kyle, and Jesse's young. So if he had somebody come in with a good offer, what is the standing of anybody else waiting in the wings? Or to use William's quote, or net, I suppose. I see what you did there, William.
Yeah. Well, Jesse obviously can play. He's the kind of keeper that right now is very about his athleticism. But keepers can play till they're 40 if they were a good enough athlete and if they develop the mental side of their game. So that's going to be the question with Jesse, how deep he can go. So if they do end up selling him to someone like Mexico, which I actually think at this point is unlikely. I think it's more likely he'll be here for the next... He honestly could play here for another 10 years easily. Start here for another 10 years easily. Now, Jimmy and Kyle are both 30, but that means they could each play another 4 or 5 years too. So there's not a real rush if those guys are content. But after that, it's a problem. Carlos Avilés is not progressing like we would like. This is going to be a big make or break year for him, I think. They actually brought in another keeper, Luis Zamudo, who's a former Sueño competitor who looks quite athletic. Right now, Carlos is holding on to that number one job, but if he doesn't progress this season and doesn't look like he's making, let's say, strides in the right direction, then his future will not be looking good. And then after that, you really have to look down into the academy at Seth Wilson or Anthony Carrera, who are both, one's a 19 and one's a 17, who both have pro potential, but again, keepers mature late. So anybody that they have at the academy, you're talking about 4 or 5 years probably before they're going to be worth anything to the MLS side. Jesse was very, very rare in his ability to sign a pro deal at 18 and actually be contributing to the MLS side. So if for some reason Bauer or Zobak don't hold up over the next 4 years, more than likely you're probably looking at having to go out into free agency, because it's going to be, even with Avilés, if he turns it around, even he's probably 3 or 4 years out. So there's going to be a gap if they don't have Jimmy and Kyle hold up.
All right. Well, I think we got through all of the really, really good club and league and delay related questions. And man, I really appreciate all of these. Some of these were really, really well thought out and well asked. So thank you to everybody who got those in. And if we didn't get to your questions, we'll probably do this again here very quickly since there shall not be soccer anytime soon. There was another question that I thought was an interesting one. It's a hypothetical from the Worst Soccer Account. Question: the three of you are at lunch. Who's most likely to pick up the tab?
Luchi Gonzalez, obviously.
That's only
Buzz'll
if it's
shoot him a text, then
that's right.
A waiter comes over and is like, "Gentlemen, this has been taken care of."
It just magically be paid for. Lucci will Venmo the restaurant. Okay.
Well, I can tell you who the least likely is, me, because I don't have a job now.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we won't be going to lunch anytime soon. Then, all right. We'll let you make sandwiches.
We'll get delivery, but we'll make sure it's from the same restaurant.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Please take care of yourself. Don't go out and be all millennial and spread the disease.
No promises.
No promises. All right. And Buzz, would you like to promote your Patreon account since clearly you're desperate for money?
Yeah, I am in fact desperate for money. Well, not to be completely fair, summer is a low time for me anyway, so it's close to my cycle anyway. But nonetheless, all sports are dead, which kills all income for me. I usually work college baseball up until about May, and then I don't have a lot going on. But the Patreon is obviously patreon.com/third degree. It seems like now is as good a time as any to sort of double down on Third Degree and see if I can push this thing and make it work on some level. So hopefully you like this podcast. Hopefully you like what we're doing. And if you do sign up, you'll find I do give some extra content there, which are kind of like mini podcasts, and hopefully people enjoy them. And I think they're worthwhile. I think they're fun. And I think, if people have questions like all these questions that were in this Q&A today, that I answer them for the patrons all the time. So, sign up and support, give us whatever you can, and hopefully we can make this thing into a real business.
All right. And I have a question for both you and Dan. How many middle fingers, Buzz, or birds, Dan, did you flip at MLSsoccer.com for failing to add Third Degree to their podcast list and article earlier this week?
Yeah, a couple. I emailed them and I tweeted at them and nothing happened. So that was kind of, kind of a slap, but whatever, It happens, I suppose.
My dog and my cat to both put their middle toe bean thingy up in the air for it.
Look, in all seriousness, I think our work speaks for itself. I think I think we do a fabulous job. So hopefully, MLS can get on board and promote us a little bit. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird. They put the podcast version of the soccer of our radio show on there. And we're not an FC Dallas focused show. We talk more Premier League generally, or at least half the show is. It was I think that list was generated from a couple of years ago where every club was asked to submit a list, and the Third Degree podcast didn't exist at the time.
That's true.
And I think that's why it's pretty hokey. So, hopefully they'll get that corrected and get you added.
That'd be lovely.
And of course, all of the listeners of the pod can obviously send an email in support of Buzz as well. And you've certainly got your own. You've started to pick up some national notoriety. People have been calling you up to participate in their shows and podcast, Buzz, and
a little bit. That was nice.
And some other people on a national level have started listening to the podcast and making comments about it on Twitter and such. So that's got to make you feel good.
Yeah, no, that any kind of you get recognition from people that you respect out in the media world that cover soccer. That's always really nice. So it has been a good couple months.
And considering you've done this longer than pretty much all of them together combined times 15, that just makes it all the sweeter, right?
I've been doing this longer than some of them have been alive.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, longer than Paxton has for sure.
Well, thank you to everybody for writing their great questions. Thank you, Buzz and Dan, again. FC Dallas fans, thank you. We love and adore you. What? Oh, no. Somebody dying in the background? SARS. We have a SARS attack? Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, FC Dallas fans. We will speak to you next week, I suppose, on another edition of Third Degree, the podcast.
Where's Thomas Rummers?